Hi, I'm Greg Essenmacher, CEO and founder of GnA Consult. On today's podcast, you're going to learn about team development and how that can influence patient experience, ultimately leading to case acceptance. One thing that you can do and learn from this podcast today is what you can do immediately in order to improve 1% better today. I hope you enjoy the show.
OrthoMarketing.com, 360-degree digital marketing solutions for your practice.
Well, hello everybody out there in podcast land. It's Dean Steinman, and guess what? We are back with another podcast for you. And hope everybody is down from the Super Bowl. If you're from the Philly area, you guys must be all stoked. If you're a Chiefs fan, kind of stinks, but that's what you guys done for everybody else out there. So and hopefully you enjoyed it. And someday when the Jets win, as you know, I'll be a happy camper. But until that day, and hope it comes, we have to just close the book and say, wait till next year. So with that said, it's now mid-February and right in the middle of winter. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some important things in the office. Most importantly, it's about your staff, guys. And I have with me, as always, VIP guest, and I'm real stoked to have with me today Greg Essenmacher. Greg is a founder and CEO of GnA Consult. And we're here to talk about your staff and you're getting your team accountable and getting them on board. So, Greg, welcome, man. How are you today?
I'm great, and I love that you're talking about your Jets. That's all I have to say is that at least you have one of the Super Bowls and you've been there. Being a Lions fan of 53 years, we don't even know what a Super Bowl is. A bowl is something you eat chips out of, and
Right.
they're super. So hey, at least you have one. It's been a while, but you have one. So hang your hat on that and enjoy that from what was that 56 years ago, but at least you have one.
I got one.
You have one.
Unfortunately, I was too young to enjoy it, but I've been, muddling through and painful ever since. But, besides, only people that could really get my pain is a Lion fan or a Browns fan. So
I mean, but just like with the practices that we work with and everyone who's listening to this, right? Just as football is, and it takes all 53 men on the roster, plus some of the practice squad, plus, as the Lions did this year, they had to pull people off the street and then put them in and plug them in with everybody on IR. It's the same in all of those dental practices that you're working in and all of your listeners are working in. It takes everybody playing a role, and not everybody's the quarterback, and not everybody's a wide receiver, and not everybody plays defensive back. Everybody plays their role to be able to uplift and be able to create a great team. So I'm excited to talk about that today with you.
Excellent segue, man. Excellent. Perfect right in. So let's jump into that. Okay, so the doctor is, what would you say? He's the GM. He's the owner of the team. He's the head coach. What would you categorize the typical dental practice?
Well, I mean, it really depends on the practice itself, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, some might be the Jerry Jones, right? Who's the owner and the general manager and the president of player personnel and. But if it's a larger organization where it might have, the doctor owner and then 2 or 3 associates and they're, 10, 12 operatories, and they have 3 or 4 auxiliary services, right? So clear aligners or ortho, and they're doing direct to consumer marketing plus other auxiliary services, full arch and sleep and all of the others. He might be more of a general manager, right? And maybe not doing, wet-handed dentistry, 20 days a week or 20 days a month, if you will. So it really depends on the practices. And we work with all different kinds. And then there's group practices too, where some are literally in the C-suite, where they're literally just managing the business and not necessarily in the business, but they work on the business. So it's a great question, right? And so for anyone who's listening, it really is appropriate to talk about what we talk about and what we do, which is all about the patient experience. And that's where case acceptance really lies. And behind that is the team development and growing your team in a very concerted way. And I'm excited to talk about that here today, because that is foundationally, if you're doing any kind of direct to consumer marketing, anyone listening to me, please hear this. If you're doing direct to consumer marketing, which means you're going out into the public and saying, we do this particular treatment, we do this service. So ortho, right? If we're going to try to attract patients for a particular service, it's so much different than if they're coming through your hygiene program. Through the hygiene program, there's a little bit of trust built up. If Betty's been coming in for 3-5 years and finally it's time to do clear aligners or some type of orthotherapy or fill in the blank, that's a little different because they trust your practice. They've been coming in time and time and time again. They know some of the players, even if a few of the players have been switched out because they've been traded or they've, were on free agency and you brought them in because you think you can make a run for the Super Bowl, right? That's a little different. If you're doing that direct to consumer marketing and you're spending money specific to bring in from the public, there is zero trust built in with that patient or prospect, because they're not even a patient yet, to try to get them to do some particular procedure with you. That takes everyone on the team being on the same page, using the same language, having a consistent message, and understanding what differentiates you in what you're trying to attract them for from the guy or gal or big box store, right? The DSOs down the street. What do you do better? And there's always something that you do better, and honing in on that message and making sure everybody on the team, from the doctor to the assistant to the front desk to the janitor, everybody knows what that is. So there's alignment. And that's so critically important, Dean, that we find with our clients that are more successful, they've got that messaging down. And it's not just something stuck up on a wall, but it's something they're living and breathing every day.
Perfect. You have to have a game plan. You have to have a strategy. You have to have this. I always tell people when you put aligners in, you can't go from tray 1 to tray 7 to tray 3 to tray 12. You have to have the right program in place. And, this is, just more important is to have your foundation. So, Greg, let's take one step back before we even do that. Let's tell your story. Tell us, who is Greg Essenmacher? What is it that you do?
Yeah, appreciate that. So I've been in the industry for 18 years and I've worked really for two major companies, right? So one of them, Steinman Group, and they have clear aligners a big part of their game, or at least for the last decade, if you will, since they did purchase, everybody knows who they purchased, and they really started lifting up that brand. But what really I have learned over the years, and now 3.5 years ago, launched GnA Consult, and it really is to help anyone who's doing their type of auxiliary service, and we happen to specialize in one particular niche. Anyone who's doing direct-to-consumer marketing, it's really every touch point of that patient journey and consistency in that messaging that I talked about, Dean, because it's not just the digital marketing. If you call it a clear aligner, everybody should be calling it a clear aligner. If you brand it like Invisalign, then everybody calls it Invisalign. Because something that we've found and we know, because research has been done on this, like a lot of money, 6 digits have been spent with consulting groups, bigger ones than ours, of course, on this particular point. And that is that if there's inconsistency in messaging from the digital, right? So that would be the advertisement, website, things of that nature out there in the ether for the public to consume, to the messaging from the first contact, that initial inquiry, phone call, whatever the case may be, front desk, and then the in-person engagement, front desk, dental assistants, clinicians, all the way through. If there's inconsistency of what you're calling any piece of it, right? So as the example, clear aligner, are you calling it brackets? Are you calling it by the brand name? Invisalign, Clear Correct, go right down the list. If there's any inconsistency in that, when it comes time for closing the case, right? Presenting the dollars and cents, there's a subconscious for those patients, the motivation behind it. They don't exactly know why sometimes, because the why is the motivation. The what's the product? You've got to deliver a good product. Like you said, you can't go from tray 1 to 7 to 3 to 8 because that just doesn't work clinically.
Right.
But the motivation of that patient, they don't know why necessarily, but they can't get to a yes because that inconsistency in messaging is called a microfracture of trust. And again, this is the direct-to-consumer lane because they don't know you from the practice down the street. They answered an ad. They thought, let me give it a shot. I've wanted to do this for a while, but let me see if I can trust practice XYZ to do this for me. So you've drawn them in somehow. You've gained the interest. Now they're determining with their spidey ears all along the way, can I trust them to actually do it? Will they deliver on what they're asking for from me? And is everybody involved going to be able to deliver them on their clinical acumen, and for me, parting with my money to deliver on the outcome that I'm looking for? And that's what we really find to be true with all of our clients. That's what's critically important. So consistency in the messaging, and that just requires training. training, and then on the deliverables internally to hold people accountable to that. It's that none of these pieces are extremely difficult or the big pieces that help the uplift in case acceptance. It's a bunch of little pieces along the way that we find and have found with clients that make the big difference.
How does a practice see the forest through the trees? Because most practices have been doing this, mature practice, doing this for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. They don't realize it's broken. They don't realize that there's no process in place. So what's the first aha moment that a doctor will have to say, whoa, I need a process? And then how do they realize, okay, what's broken and how to fix it?
Yeah, I mean, foundationally, it really has to do with the metrics, and I don't want to, get bogged down and say, well, if you don't know what your metrics and measurables are, because that can get a little foggy, and that usually comes a little bit further in the process. The first is, do you know what your conversion is for what you're spending, right? In that marketing, right? That's your lane, right? Like, how much are you spending on marketing, and what's your conversion rate on those cases? Right? If you're going to start talking about, oh, the leads are bad, well, sure. Like some of them aren't necessarily going to be through, just like in your email inbox. Some of it's junk mail. Let's just be honest, right? They get a hold of your email address and some of it comes through and you're going to get some spam. That's going to happen when you're out there doing direct to consumer marketing. But it can't be that all the leads are bad. And some of the marketing companies are better than others. Let's just call it what it is, right? But if all of them are bad, you have to start taking a look in the mirror and saying, how is my team handling some of these calls that are coming in? So really, it's transparency. So the first question that I like to ask clinicians is, tell me the last time that you listened to a phone call of an incoming call from a prospect, a prospective patient for this auxiliary service that you do, right? So for aligner therapy, right? For orthotherapy. Have you actually listened to a call? And if it's not you, then has your office manager or whoever's responsible for those that are taking those initial calls for the money that you're spending. Just the awareness piece.
Right.
And even as the owner and founder, it doesn't mean you have to filter through all the calls, but there are so many great programs out there, and I don't have to go down the list whether, it's Weave or Mango or Next Health, or we can go right down the list where they can be downloaded, and it can be the first 5 to 10 minutes of your drive home, where they could be downloaded for you and you can listen to them on your drive home. The awareness piece is so critically important to know what is happening if a patient calls your office or a prospect, because they're not a patient yet in your practice. Just having that awareness. What is happening? What is their engagement like on that initial inquiry? And that's really where it can start. Before you get into the metrics, before you get into how are you converting, before it's holding marketing companies accountable, before all of that happens, which is what we help clients to do, it's awareness. And I know doctors are busy, right? I know you're busy. You're trying to deliver clinical excellence. You're dealing with staff members, that have sick dogs and sick children and, but you have to start somewhere. And starting with the awareness piece is what we find is some of the most eye-opening. And then it's the decision, do you want to do something or not? And that's what we find.
This podcast is sponsored by orthomarketing.com. Hey, you an orthodontist or dentist looking to give your practice the competitive edge it deserves? Well, look no further than Ortho Marketing. Ortho Marketing is the dentist and orthodontist choice for digital marketing. At Ortho Marketing, we specialize in helping orthodontists and dentists just like you attract more new patients. Our team of experts knows the ins and outs of the dental and orthodontic industry, and we're here to help your practice shine. We're going to supercharge your online presence. We're going to optimize your website. We're going to harness the power of social media to connect you with the patients that you want. Say goodbye to empty chairs and say hello to a thriving practice. Choose Ortho Marketing today and watch your patient list grow. Visit orthomarketing.com and learn more and take the first steps towards your practice success. Ortho Marketing. It's not just our name, it's what we do.
So now you checked off, okay, there's a problem and I'm aware of it. Now the next step is to get your team involved. And so many practices have just a very difficult time or process getting the team involved. Why would they care? And sometimes they put the money out there. They don't care, or they offer this or this. So what would you suggest would be the best way to build up some sort of, culture where everybody is responsible to make sure that the practice is successful.
Well, I love what you just said there, where everyone's responsible, because if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. And so having individuals responsible for a piece of, a part of, ultimately one person's responsible for every step of, right? Now, it's a team sport, like I said, but I can tell you that, Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes were responsible for throwing the football. Well, most of the time. I mean, every once in a while they'll have a trick play thrown in and, a running back or, a wide receiver will throw a pass. But the vast majority, right, they're responsible for throwing the football, right? Just like the vast majority of teams have one person that's the punt receiver, right? Or the kickoff receiver, or have one person that kicks the field goals, or one person that, you get my point, that specialize. And it's so important that one person is responsible for one thing. Now, the team participates, of course, because you can't necessarily, let's just say, kick a field goal unless you have the other 10 players, right? You have a long snapper, you have a holder, and then you also have another 8 guys on the line blocking to make sure that somebody doesn't come running free and blocks the kick, right? So we know all that. But there's one person who has primary responsibility for kicking that pigskin up through the uprights and getting them the 3 points when you're trying to make a field goal. Okay. So this is what's critically important. And so understanding that someone has primary responsibility in it. So that's really where it starts. And then the other point that I want to make, and this is another area where I'm just going to say it, and I hope I don't offend too many people, but if I do, it's okay. Put on your big boy and big girl pants, because sometimes I say things that are a little direct. I'm from Detroit. Oftentimes, it's let's throw money at the problem. They'll throw money at it, meaning we'll give you a bonus per case, or if we hit this many cases, I'll give you this. But it's directed at, it's what do I think is going to motivate my team in order to act in a certain way, rather than asking the team, what would you like to do in order to get me to here? I'm here and I want to get to there. How are you going to help me get from here? If I get from here to there, because that's my goal, if you all participate in this to get from here to there, what would you like to see as a reward? So often clinicians are afraid to ask that question because they might think monetary reward. Well, maybe what they want is they want a spa day, and I want you to go with us so that we can have you paint your nails, right? Whatever it is. But asking them to get the buy-in, right? Which means as the owner, founder, CEO, regional, whatever it is, depending on the size of the group, to be a little vulnerable and open to it. Doesn't mean you have to agree to it, but at least getting the feedback. And if you need to do it anonymously because of the group, whatever the case may be, it's getting the buy-in from the group of what would you like as a reward system for what we're trying to accomplish. Because if you're profitable in what you're doing in that auxiliary service, right, in ortho, then you can certainly share a little bit in the profits of that in a proportional way. And that's what we do at GnA Consult as well. It's doctor, owner, right, DSO leaders. If you go from here to there, we know what your break-even point is. Everything above has a certain percentage on top of that. What does that look like for you? And what are you comfortable sharing in? And we don't have to give all the details, right, to the team members. But then what does that look like? And how do we get active participation? And you mentioned the word culture, right? That's developing a collaborative mindset, right? And from the clinician's point of view or the owner's point of view, an abundance mindset, right? Sharing the wealth, if you will. So those are just some of the things that we work with to be able to help break out of that frustration, right? And that we've been doing this a long time, as you framed it in the beginning. We've been doing this a really long time and we just can't seem to, or it's not like it used to be, or fill in the blank, and how to break through that glass ceiling.
So the biggest problem with every practice and the biggest fear everybody has is change. All right. So how do you so you need, as mentioned before, a great analogy. If you don't have the right quarterback and the right receiver and the right running back and the right blockers, you don't have the right play. What if one or two people just don't get on board? But they've been there for 20 years. How do you get them to get on board? Oh, I'm so busy already. I can't take on more. I'm so busy. I can't do this, or I don't want to learn something new. I don't want to know the software. They have to adapt. So what bit of advice would you tell somebody who has somebody there for 20 years, person doesn't want to get on, but they got no choice, but they're also going to be afraid to lose that person. So what do you do?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, right? And it requires, well, there's two comments that I'll have to that, and I appreciate you bringing that forward because it is difficult, right?
Sure.
The first is that concept of living from a place of fear. I'm afraid what will happen if I ask somebody to make this change. Any clinicians that are owning, managing, practicing from a place of fear, you've already lost that battle. And if you continue from that place of fear, growth is going to be extremely difficult. It just will be.
Right.
This is known. I have a lot of friends in the industry that we work on this with clinicians as well. It's a tough spot.
Sure.
Do I know that it is challenging in the market right now with good staff members? Yes. I also know a lot of really good clinicians who have fidelity that is amazing. But change is inevitable. So change management, it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's doable. The other piece that I'll share with you, Dean, is there are some, and a great friend of mine, Chelsea Myers, she's an amazing human being. Her analogy that she uses, and I love analogies because this is what I remember. I remember through stories more than I do through statistics or just, someone like me just going on and on and on and rattling on, right? And it is just this, that there are some people that do not choose to change. It's almost as if they're in a deep sleep. And somebody who's in a deep sleep, you don't wake them up. It's not good for them and they choose not to. Doesn't mean that they're a bad person, but also there's going to be a better fit for them somewhere else. And it sounds crass and it sounds harsh, but the fact of the matter is, if the entire practice is moving in another direction, that person is no longer going to fit into the direction of that group anymore.
Right.
And that's just the truth. So, EOS talks about right person, right seat. Perhaps it's not in that, at GnA Consult, we call it a micro team when they're talking about, full arch. That's my area of specialty. There's a micro team that works on and builds and grows the full arch within an entire practice, right? As that auxiliary service. And if there is ortho within, an entire practice, and that is, a specialty within a GP practice, not everybody necessarily is working on that. They can certainly work within it, if you will. And that's another piece. Perhaps there's another role for them if the organization is large enough. That's the nature of the beast. And I've seen it happen over and over where people are grateful afterward to say, I didn't know how to leave after 20 years, right? So transitioning them into something else, whether within the organization or outside of the organization. And again, I know it sounds relatively harsh, but the fact of the matter is, for the owners and clinicians, it's grow or die. It's a super competitive market. And if they've spent, in your comments there, 5, 10, 15 years, and they see all the competition coming in, and they see that it's grow or die, and this is an area to be able to build and grow their practice or their group, necessarily it has to change. It has to evolve to meet the marketplace and meet the patients where they're at of what they're looking for. So evolving and growing. And I just think that's critically important to be mindful of and not be afraid of that, or to be person dependent. And that's why you've heard me talk a lot about processes and talk about how to put formulas together. So it's not a human dependent, but it's a process dependent actions that you put into place in order to be able to, to work through some of those challenges and to get help where needed, because not everybody's a natural people leader, and that's okay too.
Most aren't, and this is great leaders out there and great business people, but a lot of them are, are experts in getting teeth straightened, getting teeth whiter, getting teeth cleaner, or overall health, and they're not experts on that. So with that said, what's one thing that somebody could do in order to keep people accountable and, without micromanaging, or do they need to micromanage? Is there, a certain checklist people have to respond? Because the last thing you want to do is, did you do this? You don't want digits. I always say to my company, I don't want digits. I want do it. So instead of, did you do this? Did you do this? Well, how would somebody, so if you give them one bit of advice, what's something that they could do in order to have accountability, to show people doing it, but also not just say, yeah, I did it, check off, and it wasn't done. So what's one bit of advice they could do?
Yeah, and it's one of the most critical pieces of advice when we take a new client on, and it really starts with setting the expectation from the very beginning. So it's not just here's a job description, here's what we want you to do, and here's the checklist of your actions, right? Here's what you need to do. You need to do A, B, C, D. This is how your opening duties, this is your closing duties, this is what we need you to do for your roles and responsibilities. Sure, that needs to be clearly spelled out, and it needs to be accurate and updated at all times. But it's also one of the big misses that happens is the annual reviews, if they're being done at all. There should be regular check-ins on performance, and it should be two ways, right? So what is the expectation of the owner for the employees? And then what are the expectations of the employee of the owner of the company that they're working for?
Right.
If there's open dialogue and it's regular throughout the course of the year, at least once a quarter, then those expectations, it doesn't have to be a checklist micromanaging. It's a regular cadence. And that's what we help to establish with our clients. And it doesn't have to be, the great thing is it doesn't have to be the owner, and it doesn't have to be, it can be delegated to office manager or other, but there are tremendous resources that are available, like through different companies, through different HR companies. HR for Health comes to mind for one. It's a great partner of ours at GnA Consult and others, because it all formulates for you and you can determine what's most critically important. Specialize in what you specialize in. You didn't go to dental school for all of the HR things, right? And HR specialists, God bless them all in the world. But being able to leverage a partner that can help you with those things is such a very small investment in order to help with the people management side, so you don't have to micromanage. And it gives a feedback loop for your team members back to you as an ownership leadership team, so that there is more communication that happens. It's so difficult when the only time that there's feedback given to an employee is when there's an issue.
Right.
That's one of the most difficult. And so another way to do it as well, to lift up, is the morning huddle. If you're not doing a morning huddle that talks about two things. One, the numbers, of course. What's your goal? What's your number to goal? Where are we at? And what is unscheduled treatment? That's one side. The other side is what I call the human side, and having some type of human side. And for a lot of clinicians, right, the human side is the most difficult side. The great thing is you don't have to lead that part of it. But I guarantee in every single practice, there is somebody who is really high in empathy in your practice. Like we talked about before, how there's always people who can specialize and lead certain aspects of your business. Let the person who's really good in empathy lead that part of your morning huddle. Doesn't mean your morning huddles have to be a half hour long. It's just simple touch points, but it's just like if you're going to go to the gym and you're going to work a muscle, it's a muscle that has to be worked. And that's what's critically important. That's the check-in. That's where you get to catch and know if somebody comes in and they're not their regular selves. At a morning huddle, you would be able to catch that and be able to support that and uplift that, so it doesn't seep into the entire office for the whole day, affect the patient experience, affect your case acceptance, and infect the entire culture for the day at the practice. And that individual can feel supported throughout the day. So these are the pieces that really lead into what you asked in the beginning of how do you avoid micromanaging or have those little blowups, mini blowups, and then have staff members who just aren't satisfied or fear of holding accountable, because those things can be caught so early on at the very beginning of the day, and then also through regular check-ins through a mechanism of feedback loop both ways.
Wow. Well said, man. That's great. All right. So two final questions. So somebody's listening to this, and now you want them to do one thing after listening to this podcast, because they understand there's a problem. What's one thing that a practice clinician should do right after this in order to get themselves out of the mud?
I mean, I would say first and foremost is sit down with whoever you consider your leader or leaders within your group and do a fair assessment of self, right? So it starts with yourself, whoever is listening to this, and then sit down with your leadership team and ask, what's one thing that we need to do better, and how do we accomplish that in the next week, right? There's a great book called Atomic Habits. I read it about 4 years ago when it first came out. Then my daughter-in-law gave it to me for Christmas this year and didn't know that I'd already read it. One of the core principles there is 1% better every day. You don't have to change everything all at once, but sitting down with leadership and say, what is the one big thing that we are challenged with, and what's one small change that we can make today? Whether it's anything that I've talked about here, right? The huddle, listening to phone calls, whatever that looks like. And then it doesn't mean that you have to rip off the Band-Aid and change everything, but it's just one small thing. What's one small change that you can make to get a little bit better? You'll know it right away. It'll be glaringly obvious. And then if you need help, reach out to somebody who can specialize in whatever that is. If you haven't done any assessments with any of your team members in years and years, take a look at what does that look like to start there. And maybe you wind it back and say, okay, what does it look like to actually do a morning huddle? And maybe you just start with that. Get feedback from the team. What does it look like if we do more cases? What would it look like? I mean, there's so many areas that we've talked about here today, Dean, in a very short period of time. I've thrown a lot at you, right? Just really high level stuff in a lot of different categories. But this is what we really work with our clients to help them to get better, faster, and stronger to be more competitive in the marketplace. And these are the areas that we touch on. So that would be the one thing that I would say, turn that mirror around and say, what can we do better? What's the areas, and what's really the one thing that we can work on today?
Yep. Well said, man. You're better, stronger, faster. The bionic man. You want to be better. $6 million doesn't buy you much these days, but back in the day it did. And I'm dating myself here, obviously, and people who are free to get it. But
I know the reference.
All right. So I have two final questions now. One is I'm going to give you the opportunity to have lunch with anybody in history. Who are you sitting down with?
Ooh, have lunch with anyone in history? That's a really good question. So many popped into my mind all at once. I would probably want to have lunch with Maya Angelou. I love, and I'm gonna paraphrase because I won't get it right exactly, but she said, "People will forget what you say, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget the way you made them feel." And it harkens back to the question that you said, when you were talking about staff and challenges with staff and holding accountable. It's not so much the words, and it is a little bit the actions, but it's really the way that you show up. And if you really want to make connection with your team members and create that authentic connection, is showing up authentically. And that's really all it takes. And it requires being a little bit vulnerable. And admitting when you make a mistake, and we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes, and mistakes are just learning opportunities that we haven't learned from yet. And it's okay. So yeah, that would be the person that comes to mind for me.
All right, good. Haven't heard that one yet. Good, great response. And lastly, you also now, I've got a lot of powers in my hand besides this lunch thing. I'm giving you the ability to put up a billboard in Times Square. What's it say?
Love more.
Nice. There you go.
We could use some more love in the world.
Good. Love it. Great. Greg, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it, guys. Such insight here. Obviously, you need this. It's very rare. And I think the practices all day long. I could count it on one finger in the last month how many people actually had this in place. Okay, you need this. You have to take a step back, look at your health of your business, look at how your processes are being run. This is not 2020. 2015 or 2010 or even before. This is 2025. Things have changed. You have to adapt. And you said it, grow or die, adapt or die. You have to adapt and you have to learn. So be open. Greg, if somebody wants more information, what's the best way to talk to you and reach out to you?
Yeah, best way is to find me on my website. There's tons of free information on there, just on patient experience, case acceptance, that's applicable to all auxiliary services. And it's dental consult, the number 4, the letter U.com. That's the easiest way.
dentalconsultforyou.com. Greg, thanks so much for joining. I appreciate it. We're in podcast land. Thanks so much for listening. Once again, we had a lot of different variables here. And again, if you are an Eagles fan, congrats. If you were a Jets or any other fan, next year is the year. I could feel it. Listen to this podcast, guys. Think and act. That said, Greg, thanks so much. Everybody in podcast land, thanks so much for listening. Be safe, be happy, love, and smile. Bye-bye, everybody.
orthomarketing.com. 360-degree digital marketing solutions for your practice.